Ken,
I don't think we're late at all.
you
I
think you're
think
right on time?
I think we're right on time. I think we're now streaming live on podcast on YouTube. Uh, it'll be a podcast later,
We're
kids.
pod streaming cast live now on Tube of You.
Well said. And you know what it feels like?
What does it feel like?
It feels like an Agile thing with Matt Beam
And Mike Markey.
And Jeff Singleton.
and no topic.
It's not no topic. We can always make up a topic.
It's more fun if I say it though.
Never let it be said that we can't just make something up as
There will be a topic that emerges out of the chaos.
chaos.
Yeah, I deliberately mispronounced that.
Did you?
Did
Yes.
on
Okay.
purpose even.
Gotcha.
So the topic that we have on deck today, I don't know if it's worth talking about, but the future of Agile. I wonder if we should change the name of the podcast, actually. I had that
To
thought.
This not agile thing?
Yeah, so the thought that I had was, let's change it to here's this Agile thing, but Agile, the word would be struck through.
And
To-
replaced with
Nothing, just the strike through.
here's this thing.
It's not Agile anymore, and we're not sure what it's going to be exactly. But then I realized, the name of the podcast is going to be in plain text. It's going to go through systems that don't, because strike through is actually formatting. It's not in encoding, right? So it wouldn't actually render correctly. So I thought that wouldn't work.
Well,
but
the name would still be the name.
the name would still be the name.
You bring up an
yeah.
interesting point, though. Earlier this week, I thought about that. I thought, as we move along the continuum, and I don't know if the reference, I'm not saying Agile no longer becomes a thing, but it becomes part of the fabric of just what we do. Does calling it out make sense, or do we rename things? And I just thought, well, that's a fleeting thought. All right, on to the next thing. Go install that toilet. So, I'm installing it. I just finished installing the toilet. That's why.
I got that from the context.
So,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, is renaming it, or is a name change in the future something that's worthwhile, or?
I think definitely I think we're going from capital A Agile to lowercase, because you still want to move with a quick, easy grace, right? That's what we're helping teams and organizations do. But we can't be selling capital A Agile, because who needs that, right?
Well, they already bought it.
Fortunately, in your infinite wisdom of font selection, you chose lowercase typeset. So we are lowercase agile anyway.
I should just claim that win. Yes, 100%.
In your
Once
apparent
again.
wisdom.
Ahead of the curve. You're welcome.
There you go. So there were on this there was a conversation, Jeff, several shows ago. You had made the comment, someday I hope we get to a point where we don't call it agile ways of working, we just call it working. And maybe that's really what's going on now. For whatever reason, agile does resonate with agile ways of working do resonate. The ability to be responsive does resonate. The ability to work in smaller chunks does resonate, kind of, right? Doing delivery certainly resonate. But there's still aspects in organizations where they just wouldn't consider doing incremental work to achieve a goal, that some work fits better in the more traditional molds. And it's all just getting stuff done. So the value we've perceived ourselves as bringing into the marketplace has to do with helping them learn about those alternate ways of working that were not the traditional thing that they were used to. And then running into whatever growth resistance where we've come across, change resistance, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're heading into this brave new non-0% interest rate world where people are having to justify their purchases, justify their expenditures.
As they should have all along. Like
And
bad,
yet,
bad
and
on us.
yet,
Yeah,
and yet they may not have entirely.
yeah.
I mean, I've been in organizations where you get a budget for doing things that you say you're going to do. And then as the year progresses on, you start finding you have surplus budget. And in those organizations, if they don't find a way to spend that money, they will lose that money. Right? And you've seen this too, Jeff, because we were both involved with a client that had that exact problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so toward the end of the year, they would get really silly about the things that they would spend money on.
But they were only able to do that. I don't know which client you're talking about or the context, but I'm wondering
And
if
we'll
maybe
never say.
we will not say. But I wonder if part of that dynamic was that they could get away with that for whatever reason. But what happens if times get hard and you get a new leader in there who says, we're going to do zero-based budgeting. So if you want money next year, you're going to have to pitch me for it. You're going to have to, right? What would happen at that? I wonder.
You know, this conversation is interesting because it kind of touches on a nerve. It's a raw nerve that I've had for a very long time. The whole notion of, oh, we've got budget and we got to hurry up and spend it. And that, for time immemorial for me, has seemed like the dumbest I have ever heard of.
It's
and
kind
it's
of
the way
the
we're
opposite.
structured.
It's kind of the opposite of the term fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not what you would do with your own money, is it? It's something that you do as a
Oh,
professional
thank
manager.
God I've got a lot of money. I've got to go spend it now. It's like not even think. It's like, oh no, oh no, there's money here.
Yeah. No, yeah, actually, you're right. It doesn't strike me as a thing you would do as a wise fiduciary.
I'm gonna go buy a block of ice.
Because maybe I'll need ice.
Park
I
it in
don't-
my driveway.
Yeah, exactly. had
I
ice
don't know if
last
this
year.
is a Western corporate thing, or I don't know how other countries, corporations function. I only know what I've experienced here. But it always just seemed kind of bass backwards. Why wouldn't you just do zero-based budgeting? And I learned about zero-based budgeting back in the mid-'80s. And I thought, well, why isn't everybody just doing that? Because this other thing just seems very strange. And to your point, Mike, we don't do that in our personal lives. Then again, I think maybe there are some attitudes of, hey, we got money. There's money in the account. Let's spend it. And I don't know. It's this whole consumption thing that, I don't know, it just all smacks. And
You know, I was listening to this guy named Mark Andreessen, who's famous in tech, right? He built the first Netscape browser. He's an investor now. But he was talking about a book. I can't remember who the author of this book was, but the dynamic was founders versus professional managerial class, the PMC, right? And like the professional managerial class is a thing that emerged, to oversimplify, right? 1800s, 1900s, and you see it today, right? Like the most effective people in running companies are people like Zuckerberg. Whatever you think of Mark Zuckerberg, like his ability, and Elon, right? Like whatever you think of Elon, these guys get results, right? And there's some his theory, or the theme of the book, I think, or one of the themes of the book, is that when control passes from the founders, who are fiduciaries and think and act that way ruthlessly, to this class of people who are doing a job, right? And they don't think about it in the same way. That's how this behavior emerges. It's like it's a sociological phenomenon as much as anything else, I think, is how he would say it. I don't know if that's a rabbit hole worth going down, but it seems pretty clear that something like that dynamic is in play.
we've touched on this in past episodes where, you know, the discussion of where the mindset is with startups and founders,
Yep.
and then their pursuit of, you know, the brass ring. And if they hold on to ownership, where things go versus, the whole idea is let's get an IPO, cash out, get my billions, and then bring in, professional managers. And a lot of times venture capitalists will push that button. They want to get their return on their investment, and so their
Yeah.
objective is to let's get this startup to public offering so that I can get my billions back and stuff too.
Yeah.
And so they push that, and it will tend to push out a founder because they try to convince them that, well, you need some professional management. You're scaling up, you're growing, blah, blah, blah. And you need some professional management here. And
People
so
have
then,
done this before. People
yes,
with
exactly.
experience managing professionally.
Yes. As a class.
That's
And they
interesting.
come with a whole middle hierarchy.
I'll have
Yes,
to
they
read
do.
that. So Andreessen wrote that? Okay.
No, he was talking about a book that he had read.
Okay.
And it was not, I don't think it's a recent book. He was talking about, because he's an omnivore, information omnivore. But I think what he was saying was it made sense to him. It helps him understand sort of the landscape. I'll find the book and send it to you, the name of it.
An information omnivore, equal opportunity, meaty topics, and word salad.
It's how you make sure you've got all the vitamins and minerals you need for your daily
For
whatever.
your growing mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully.
No,
Ron.
I was just listening to the All In podcast, and they were talking about how venture capital has become way harder in the past few years. I think I understood what they meant. The class of Y Combinator, the number of this Paul Graham startup Paul Graham runs a thing called Y Combinator with some other people, and they just they incubate startups. And between 2012 and 2015, they had a large number of companies that went on to generate a bunch of revenue. And since then, there's like 3, if I recall correctly. And Chamath and Jason and David from the All In podcast were talking about how VC used to be easier, I guess is how I would. But recently it's harder as a VC. The game has gotten much harder as a VC. I think that's directly related to ZERP, right?
What do you think? What is the purpose of a VC? What is their lot in life?
To get startups off the ground and launch successfully.
So, are you saying VCs are driven by a need to watch people with dreams achieve their dreams, or are VCs investors?
I think a lot of them would say both.
invest money in an instrument, have it grow, and they get a return on that investment.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I know in one of the previous episodes, they're talking about how in the mid-'90s, the thought was somebody founds a company and then the VCs give them money, but then they get those founders out quickly. That was the assumption in the 90s. And Y Combinator sort of changed that. Y Combinator was actually the people who founded this thing should probably stay at the helm. So it's an interesting question. I think a lot of VCs would say it's both. We help grow the founders and we get our money back. It's a win-win. I think that's what they would say. I don't want to speak for them.
I would say, based on what we've been talking about, it's entirely possible that when they started their VC venture, they were out to help people. I've got money. I can invest in good ideas and give them, I'll help people achieve their dreams. I'm going to run a Shark Tank. I'm going to do the whole thing. And then their situation got bigger. They had to bring in some help. That help became more motivated by the profit motive than by the helping motive.
I wouldn't know.
And if that were the case, then they would fall prey to the exact same thing that all the corporations are falling prey to, that they're driven by profit because the founder is no longer there. When the founder was there going, we are a purpose-driven organization. We have a why. And I am deeply invested in that why. But at some point, things get turned over and it becomes all about the dollar. or
Well,
the
it's the
yen or the mark or whatever.
prioritization. I think if you think about it, um, and this is not all VCs,
Mhm.
if you scale that down, I mean, then what we're talking about are angel investors, the individuals and their priorities. My experience has been that the angels tend to have the number one priority as helping grow organizations, ideas, innovation. And the second priority, and it's a very close second, is and I want to get a return on my investment. And
Yes.
so if I give you $1 million to develop this, it's because I believe in you. I believe in the vision that you have, and I want to see it grow. But I also need to see my $1 million back.
Yes.
And maybe it's not tomorrow. At some point, to your point, Mike, maybe if that angel were to, bring on other angels and become a larger VC organization, then the priorities, I think they do tend to shift. And so it's no longer that the drive for innovation and support of that is number one. It's profitability becomes number one, and then a close second becomes the whole innovation and desire to help somebody get something off the ground. So
Yeah. It's a fine line because you don't want to demonize the idea of being able to make a profit or to be
oh
able
no,
to get a return on your investment. And I don't want to be misinterpreted as thinking that
Mm-mm.
that was the point of that statement. It's just if it becomes your only motive, then why are you doing this? You're doing this to make money. That's the whole point. And
Yeah.
okay, so let's take that back to our problem. So our problem is
I wonder if you need both, right? You need a mission that helps people, and it needs to be profitable, because
Yeah.
it does rhyme exactly with what we were talking about. Like, I think maybe what you could say is capital A Agile got too focused on the mission of helping people be agile and lost scope, lost connection with the value proposition, right? Of how does it help us make money?
okay. Certainly, the Agile Industrial Complex, such as it is, has grown up around the idea of bringing agility to the masses for a profit. And for good or ill, this is the industry in which we find ourselves. Now, we may not be it's the industry. It's not our mode of addressing the industry. But we are surrounded by people who got into this. It's like when you're doing interviews for people and you're saying, why would you want to do this job? And they come in, and if they were to come into you and say, well, I did some looking up and it turns out it looks like being a Scrum Master is a really lucrative job. So I want to be a Scrum Master. And then I found out the real money was in coaching. So I'd want to be a coach. And that's,
Yes.
and it's like,
Not a
okay,
great
but
answer.
why do you want to do this?
they're chasing the dollar.
Yeah. They've got half of it, but half is not enough.
Yeah. And you can get the same thing when you're interviewing for a developer position or for, why do you want to be a developer? Well, I looked at my options and that's the one that'll get me the most money. It's like,
Yeah, I never thought I would become a coach, right? It's not something I pursued. But like the way that I got this job in 2007, 2007 is when I went to the development department. And working in this XP shop was magical, right? It was unlike any other job I've ever had before. We played ping pong, but the ping pong wasn't the point. The point was people were allowed to focus and manage their own time and attention. And we treated them like adults, and we had objective measures for when it was working and when it wasn't working. And outside entities came in and studied how we were able to be so productive and high quality, right? Like it was a phenomenon. And so that's really what keeps me interested in this thing. It turns out if you can do that, then you're generating value and people throw money at you to some extent, right? Because it's all connected. But it was never about dollars. It seems to me like you have the whole thing or you don't have anything. I don't know.
Okay.
You've got the mission and you've got the material outcomes of pursuing a mission. Like you're creating value for people
Yeah.
or you're not. Yeah.
Well, and as long as we're sharing, I got into this because I was in an organization that was very much driven by the clock and driven by work that needed to get done, but they were throwing traditional levers at it and trying to get results in the traditional PMI project management way of approaching things.
Yes.
And we were struggling with that because
Yeah.
the changes were fast and furious, but there was a general denial that change existed, that we gave you a mission, go do the mission. And the next week they're like, oh, and by the way, adjust the mission this much. And then we would say, you just changed the mission. They said, no, we didn't, because we did a change management plan, and we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and we've got sign off on the ability to alter the original document to include the new thing, and therefore original scope is maintained. It's like, but you didn't take anything out. You just added more stuff, and the date has not moved. And so we started experimenting, not with things to change that, because that was a known quantity. That's just the way things were. But somebody brought in the Extreme Programming Explained book, and we flipped through that and said, I bet we could do this in very small pockets. Like, we could take work that we've been assigned through the traditional model, and we could put a couple people on it and try pair programming and do. And when we tried that, it was just really fun and really exciting, and it actually worked. It got stuff done, and it got stuff done better. And we said, we're going to see if we can get more of this. And we played around with how do we bring more people into that cycle. And we kind of came close to evolving our own version of something that looked this much like Scrum. And I was so proud of what we had come up with that I went to a best practice sharing conference of the corporation, and I said, this is what we did. And somebody goes, oh, you missed it by this much. You just need this. And he hands me the Scrum book, Schwaber and Beadle's Scrum book. And I read that on the plane going home, and I'm like, this is it. This is the part we were missing.
Which part was it, by the way?
I'm gonna defer on that because I've forgotten. It's been so long now.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was the time box stuff, the way that we were doing groups, because what we had evolved into was a feature team concept, where it's very small groups of people, like a tester, a developer, and a tech writer working together, and they were assigned a feature. And the features were just doled out across the timeline. It was more Kanban-ish than Scrum-ish.
But your working groups were tiny, like 3 people?
They were very tiny, very tiny working groups, or maybe 4 people if we wanted to pair developers up. And that was what we were working with, but there was no way to manage the flow of that work. It was still, people would try and start everything at once, or there would like, oh, I'm gonna balance. And so we needed something to break it up into manageable buckets.
Make it a pull system instead of. Were they the same 3
No, it
people?
didn't have to be a pull system, but we didn't think about managing flow. We didn't think about whip limits or anything like that. We just knew if we tried to do everything at once, it wasn't much better than it was. And then when we tried, we said, well, okay, if we were to do a sprint using this Scrum thing, we couldn't pull that much stuff in. Therefore, the universe of things we could focus on was more contained, and it allowed better focus. And then when we started seeing that focus, we're like, okay, this is doing better. And actually, it worked so well that the very first time we tried a project using Scrum from its inception to its delivery was the one and only time that product line had ever shipped anything on time and on budget in a 10-year history.
But you probably didn't have Little's Law to explain it, or context switching, or any of that stuff.
It was almost all just intuition. We would just
Yep.
look at it and go, okay, this makes sense. Let's try that.
Yeah.
Oh, and or that doesn't feel right. Let's not go there. And then people will say, why don't you want to do that? I'm like, that's not what this is. This is
Yes.
different. Like, I think we should micromanage you now. No. See, that's against what we're talking about.
But I don't have a theoretical framework to systematically push back and demonstrate why this is better and make predictions.
But that's
Yeah.
that's where Scrum helped, because then when it allowed us to kind of point at the book and say, okay, so this thing you're doing right now where you're trying to redirect the group to do something other than what you told them to do yesterday.
Yeah.
This is what we're trying to protect against. So we're going to say no until or we'll come back with a more nuanced approach and we'll say, all right, tell me the relative importance of this compared to everything else on this little list. Is it more important than any of these things, or is it less important? And they're just like, it's important. It's like, that's not an answer. Is it more important than any of these or less important? And if they and there's, if I say it's less, you're not going to do it. So we're not going to do it yet. But in a couple of weeks, we're going to do another one of these, and there's a chance to get it in there. No today doesn't mean no forever. It means not now.
It's so funny because there are people today who would criticize Scrum because they would say it doesn't have theory. It's based on empiricism, and you need a way to explain why and to make predictions like that.
Last week when Nigel was here, Nigel said Scrum doesn't have empiricism at all. He said,
He
no.
said the pillars of
The pillars of empiricism don't exist. That's not real. Like Scrum has said, it's based on the pillars of empiricism, but those are not what empiricism is. Empiricism is not knowing an outcome, not having, and you're trying to. That was what he was saying. So whether you agree with that definition or not,
Yeah, I need more clarity on that. I can't remember exactly what it was.
it certainly was more empirical than what we were doing.
Oh, for sure. Here's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. It represented a leap forward from where you were at the time. But I wonder if, like, we're now 20 years later or whatever, we need to look at the next leap, right? We need that theory in place.
I think the impetus for taking the leap still exists in the world. Like we've gone into dozens of organizations, and they are coming from a pure waterfall way of doing things, and they are still struggling with the same things we were struggling with 20 years ago. And they're still, because that's still the practice. These larger organizations that have been laggards getting into the agile world are still subject to the same demons that were plaguing everyone. So that's where we can be valuable, because we've seen it happen. We've seen people get out of that state. We've seen stuff get out. But the problem is we're dealing with the very strong resistors. Like the industries we're looking at now are very conservative. They've got ways of doing things that are ingrained in dozens of years to hundreds of years of existence. Maybe not hundreds, but
In some cases. Some
yeah.
banks are old.
Up to a century of existence, doing things a certain way. And you're coming in and you're telling me that we're not going to do it that way, that our way is wrong. Like, we've been here for 100 years.
We must be doing something right.
Yeah.
And they are. I don't know if resistance is my favorite way of framing that, because in some cases maybe waterfall is appropriate, and maybe for some of their work it is. I think maybe one of the things we need to do going forward is to help people understand where an agile approach is appropriate, right? And I think basically it breaks down. This is the whole project to product thing. It's like in some cases you're doing the same thing you've done before. You know the steps. You know what's going to happen. You know how long it takes. You can just plan that work and work the plan, and that's waterfall, and that's good. That's the most efficient approach. In some cases you're doing something new. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the steps are going to be. You have to take big stuff and break it down and get feedback and maximize your throughput and get feedback as quickly. Like, just understanding where to apply this and why you do it in the first place, I think might be super helpful. Because then resistance is like, No, I don't really understand why you're having me do this.
Well, I think so. The resistance, and you're right. I probably shouldn't say resistance like that. But the way that I'm thinking of this right now, there's a lot of organizations where yes, they understand the work that they're doing and they've set out a plan and they're going to work the plan, but they are also in a very dynamic environment where the plan would have to change frequently,
Interesting.
right? And so every impact to that plan, because they're all about risk management. They're all about trying to anticipate the things that are going to go wrong. What are the things that have already gone wrong? What's our path back to things going right? How are we going to? And it's this whole change management explosion of activity, all centered around this just inevitable change maelstrom they're in. And they're still insisting that they're going to stay the course and follow their plan, and they're going to make the plan fit the new reality, instead of going, all right, your organization, your situation is too dynamic to run that way. Right? You need something different. You need something, the things you're struggling with, you can't deliver. Well, you can't deliver because your people can never focus on getting stuff done because you're always redirecting them, or you're always interrupting them, or you're always getting the next big shiny jewel that you have to add to the pile of stuff that they're already behind in delivering.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, people out there, if this sounds familiar to you, we can help. There are things
Both
that
of
can
you.
be done. Yeah. And it's not that we're going to come in and smack you with an agile stick and say, this is what you need to, it's gone beyond that now. Right? We've already done the organizations that were fit for agile out of the box.
The easy
Right?
ones.
Yeah. They
The
jumped
obvious
on the
ones.
bandwagon and they've already gone and they've evolved to the next stage. They've transcended agile into whatever the next thing is. The next thing is a pragmatic approach to the work. Sometimes waterfall's appropriate, sometimes Kanban's appropriate, sometimes something like Scrum is appropriate, sometimes just sticking everyone in a room and panicking for a week and getting it done is appropriate.
If you're that far in the hole, I
Yeah.
think you hit the nail. I think you used exactly the right term, change management. I think that's the core of what we can provide, is to say your organization could be better and more fit for purpose and more performant in these areas. Here's what that looks like. Here's the stages. Here's how we break it down. Here's how we get you there.
Yeah.
Like, that's worth paying for, I think.
But the struggle and resistance comes in when they come in and say, okay, we'll you say that Scrum would be appropriate for what we're doing now. So you want us to do Scrum. Mm-hmm. So we are now going to manage Scrum using our old tools. And
I wouldn't recommend.
No, it's not recommended. And that's where the struggle comes in. They say, no, we have this strong organization built around these tools, this toolbox, this way of approaching problems, this way of putting management oversight over work, this way of managing, and we're going to apply all that to something that you've given us this wonderful visibility into. Look how well we can see how the team is functioning or not functioning from our perspective, thereby giving us a direct line in to interfere with laser focused accuracy.
You know, Nigel said something last week, and then I swear to God, Jeff, I'll let you get in there because you're a little bit fuzzy, but I can tell that you're trying. Nigel said something last week. He said, I'm not in the convincing business, right? Like, if people aren't willing to try something different, he can't help them. I think that's probably part of the dynamic here. It's like, if you really want to try something, like if you understand our theory of the case and buy in and want to try it, awesome. We can actually make some changes that will help you. If you want to make this thing and then micromanage it in a way that does inconsistent, I can't, you will not get the return on that investment. I can't help you.
Yeah, I saw. I didn't. Obviously, I wasn't there, but I like what he's saying. You're not in the business of convincing, because it's the old saw of trying to push a rope. You can't push a rope. If somebody's really interested, they will follow your guidance, and if they're not interested, they're going to resist, to use Mike's term, regardless, for any old excuse. It doesn't matter. But I wonder. I'm just trying to imagine where we would be right now and where we'll go in the future. What if we no longer compared and contrasted waterfall to agile, what if we just ceased comparing those two approaches? What if, and in fact, what if from the very early stages of, what we call agile now, especially the burgeoning Agile Industrial Complex, I think was built largely on comparing and contrasting and dissing the, the waterfall. But what if we didn't even do that? Where would we be? I'm not saying it would help people embrace change more, because the reality is people are going to resist change anyway. That's just what we've learned over God knows how long. But what if we hadn't, waterfall bad, agile good, and now we're in a stage where, okay, agile bad. What's the next thing?
Right.
Waterfall good.
Let's get the next stone in place before we leap off this one.
It's the pendulum. It's this ever swinging pendulum, right?
I smell it. Go ahead.
Oh, go no.
I smell a topic.
Oh, do you?
I do. I've heard. I can't remember who it was.
Sense of smell. Sorry.
There was somebody who was talking about the origins of the term waterfall and how it comes out of some paper and how it was misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I feel like maybe that's a valuable thing to zoom in on, because I think, Jeff, you're right. I think it feels like maybe, I don't know if it's a false dichotomy, but maybe just not useful, or as useful as it used to be.
Maybe it was useful if you were trying to sell a certain approach.
This is
and
the
so
smell.
you got to have an enemy. You got to have a competitor. So you down them at their expense. But the reality is there was value in what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. There's always some better way to do things. If you get rooted in what you may have called waterfall, then things change. The environment changes. Everything doesn't adapt well, as we've learned, obviously, over many years, to a waterfall approach. Same thing, though, can be branded for agile as well. And so if we're just steadfastly, these are the bedrock agile principles, and by God, there's value in some of those principles, but how do you apply them? And how do you apply them in the next iteration of how we work together? And I'm not coming up with any labels, and frankly, I would be okay with not coming up with a label.
Yeah. Maybe it's useful to remember that what we call the Agile Manifesto today was born out of mostly disagreement.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's a group of people who got together to ski for the weekend, and we're about to leave, and we're like, we don't have anything on paper. Can we just talk about what we agree with? Like, what's the overlap here? People mostly disagreed even then. It's not like it's, was carved into a stone.
Well, I mean, any change management method starts with having to have a problem or having to have something that's broken, right? And in the Cotter method, it's what's your burning platform, and what's the conflict, what's the problem that needs solving, and it comes right out, and that's the reason why I don't like Cotter as much, because you have to start with a problem. Like, can it? I like to think that there's people out there who would like to change the way they're doing things simply for the benefit of getting better at what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
It's like you don't necessarily need to improve because there's fire and pain and suffering going on. It's easier to get motivation if you're on fire, but
That's always true. So he would not say just the desire to get better is a sufficient problem, or
yeah. I mean, which is goes against, like the whole drive thing where it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That the desire to get better at a thing, mastery, is
Yeah.
sufficient justification for changing, for doing activity. That's the theory behind that.
Maybe it's a difference between what motivates individuals and what motivates organizations.
Uh-huh.
Maybe.
And what motivates organizations?
When it's really screwed up and things are on fire, and finally we have to.
But what else? We've already talked about this today. Purpose or profit, right? And maybe a little of both, or maybe a little of either. But
Yeah, it depends on the organization, I guess, because organizations are just groups of people.
yeah, and teams are just groups of people, and
Yeah, it does become that has different characteristics.
yes, the
Yeah.
motivation is different based on the scale of what you're looking at.
Yeah, that's true.
Individuals, teams, departments, divisions, entire corporations, organizations.
The whole can be different than just the sum of the parts, maybe is a way
Yeah.
to say it.
But the way that we've looked at this in the past, when you have a publicly traded organization that by and large has a fiduciary responsibility to be profitable, in fact, to pursue profit, possibly to the exclusion of all other concerns, then it doesn't matter what your people down in the trenches are motivated by. Eventually, there's going to be a conflict between that personal motivation or that mission-driven motivation that can still live and thrive down at the trenches. But at the highest level of the organization, their shift has gone from mission to profit, and eventually, there's a level where those two collide, where the pure profit motive and the pure mission better adapt together perfectly, or the 12,000-pound gorilla from the top that is just going to overwhelm the entire purpose-driven thing from down below.
Yeah. Maybe that's why leadership is so difficult, because there's not it's a balance. It's about judgment. You need both, and it's like, how do you apply that in any particular situation is not obvious. Like, you need to be focused on the mission, and you have to make sure that you're effective. So the numbers, are you profitable? That all matters too. You can't abandon any of it.
But have you ever seen that I've been in an organization where we're purpose driven. We're doing the work, and we're loving the work, and we keep seeing these requests from beyond from on high to do things a certain way, and we're just like, that stuff makes no sense. This is what we're actually trying to do. And then there were people from our peers who got elevated into a higher managerial class, and suddenly they started saying those things too. And it'd be like, you're looking at them going, what happened, man? Like, what did you drink?
What flavor was that Kool-Aid?
Yeah.
Are you talking about nonprofits or no?
It wasn't nonprofit.
Interesting.
But I mean, when you're dealing with the customer, when you're implementing a product with a customer there that needs things, and you are providing those things, that's a very powerful thing. And we've tapped into it with the concerns in the Agile Manifesto. We said, that the customer interaction is more important.
Yeah.
So when you're down there in the trenches doing the work, and you actually have a customer that you can talk to, it's very powerful. It's very driving, right?
Yeah.
That you can get instant feedback from someone about the stuff you're doing.
And it's engaging.
It's engaging, and the way that you respond to that directly influences if your organization will be successful. Like, if you handle their problem, they might give you more money.
Yeah. But it's a bet. It's a venture capital bet.
It's not.
It's not a guaranteed return.
And I have a question for, Jeff, I know you've talked about your work with nonprofits. I have an obnoxious question for you. Is this why nonprofits sometimes are so dysfunctional? Because they don't have the governing sort of influence of needing to make a profit?
No.
No, it's not.
No.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, first of all, I think we need to dispense with the notion that nonprofit um, is a business model. It is not. It is not. It's been treated that way. It's merely a tax status. I don't care whether you are for profit or not for profit. You still have a market that you have to address, and you better be delivering some value to them. Whatever you do with the money that you get in, the revenues that you get in, is irrelevant. Honestly, at the end of the day, I think it's irrelevant. And when you box yourself in, oh well, we're a nonprofit, we can't. That's BS. I'm sure I have lots of not-for-profit friends that would maybe disagree with that, but I think they are boxing themselves in to a mindset, a thinking model of, or a mental model to use your term, Matt.
Not my term,
a mental
Steve's.
model that confines them, and it prevents them from being more innovative. Not for profit is just merely a tax status.
It doesn't mean no profit. It
So
doesn't mean lose money.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Well, because if you lose money, you stop being able to do the thing. So is what you're saying, even if you have a nonprofit tax status, you still need to manage your financial flows in such
Absolutely.
a way that you have at least as much as you had when you started.
Or
so
you
that
go out of
can-
business.
Or you have to stop. Yep. Okay. That
Then
makes
you
sense.
are no profit.
Right. Yeah, totally.
I work for
There's-
a no profit. What does that mean? We're losing money like crazy, and
means-
we're going to keep doing that until we can't sustain that anymore.
And then we stop helping, like whatever the mission is, by the way.
Precisely. And so that you do have to have that financial, that fiduciary, well, I'm not going to conflate those. You do have to have that financial support, because if you don't have that, then you're not going to deliver on your mission anyway. And
Yeah.
I don't care if mission is number one, and it should be number one, but you're not going to just do it for free. Nobody works for free. That's the reality of this world. And so you got to be able to make some kind of financial ends meet. And people are going to stop giving you money if you're not delivering on the mission. So
Yeah. Everybody has material needs.
Uh-oh.
early.
I was going to say,
Go
go
ahead.
on.
No, you go ahead. No, I want to hear what
You had a point.
right,
I
right,
had a non-point.
a non-point.
Yeah, go on. You go.
I was actually going to harken back to a statement. I don't know. I think it was Matt that said earlier about the Agile Industrial Complex being too focused on, as it built this Agile Industrial Complex, it was too focused on the mission and not on profitability. And I don't know that I buy that, because when you look at a lot of these scaling models that have been commercialized, maybe they had a beginning, a seed, a kernel at the very beginning of, hey, here's a good idea, but then it quickly flipped into, how can we make more money out of this, more classes, more education, let's just massively expand this thing. And so that was a very quick flip for, hey, it's no longer about the mission. It's about, the mission became secondary.
Yeah.
And
I
The
agree.
mission became selling training. That was the mission initially, right?
I totally agree. Just to clarify, I wasn't clear about that. I didn't mean relative to their own, because I think that's true. They got seduced into the money. What I meant was the Agile Industrial Complex got too focused on the mission of being agile and coaching people and stuff, and not focused on the outcomes for their clients, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
To the exclusion of, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that was it's interesting, yeah, that I hadn't realized that, but like it does they were able to do that because well, at the same time, you're right, they got focused on selling certifications that were maybe more focused on the mission of being agile, but which didn't really confirm or demonstrate the value of those certifications or adhering to those frameworks for the clients, for the people actually paying the bills. They built up a bunch of risk there that maybe they didn't see, right? They were
Maybe they
selling
didn't
this.
see, or maybe they thought, no, this is still a cash cow and it's still making money, and I'm going to cash out at some point. So as
I
long as
really
I
don't
can
know.
sustain it,
You'd have to get into their head to say, right?
yeah, right. And this is pure opinion, and we're not
Yeah.
accusing anyone of anything. And so
Totally.
I think I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Forget it. I don't think.
It's hard to say. You know, obviously the people that we seem to be criticizing here would have a very complete answer to this stuff and why it made sense to them and why it still makes sense. So I'm not claiming like we have
Oh,
the answer.
okay.
It's
I
interesting.
found my train.
Go ahead.
So there was a point at which there was a recognition, oh, this became all about the money. And and that actually I think is when Scrum Alliance and Scrum.org spewed off from each other, right? There was Scrum.org said, okay, we're going to go regain the mission, right? We're going to go teach people the reality of being Scrum. We're going to do Scrum the hardcore way.
Yeah.
But to do that, we have to sell training. And so at the very least, Scrum.org, I appreciate the fact that you can get a certification from Scrum.org and you are certified. You do not have to keep paying a stipend into that every year
Yeah.
to maintain, or every couple of years to maintain that.
Just to maintain your official status as
Yeah.
certified.
Right. At
Yeah.
that point, it's like, okay, this certification body is becoming and then they would justify, well, we've become this large organization. We have to maintain ourselves. How do we pay our people? We have to get some money from something. So we do it through membership. You could say.
I had the choice to extend my certifications. I didn't find it necessary. Like I learned what I could learn, and then I didn't. It's interesting that I don't know. This obviously it's easy to criticize in retrospect, and I haven't really paid much attention to it. But maybe they could have spent more time focusing on evidence-based management, which is one of the things that Scrum teaches. I think that's how, like if you talk to Ryan Ripley, right? What is Scrum good for? He would point to the EBM framework to say, what's the expected value? What's the actual value? So it's not like they don't have ways to do this, but I don't know.
Yeah, but it's not built in. It's not like you go into it saying, okay, this is, unfortunately, because the practice is so different from what has come before it, you almost have to focus on the behavior differences, the performance, the practice differences first, or they're not even going to be doing something that will look like this new model or this new way of doing things. So you end up focusing on practices and then they stop. They go, okay, we've got your practices. We're good.
Yeah.
And they don't take the next step, which is to get into, okay, now let's focus on the product people and make sure we're bringing the right things to the table. That was the one thing about Scrum that stood out to me in the very, very the very first Scrum class I took, is the product owner was present in the training as a name, as a concept, but there was no instruction as to what they should do. Like, we told the developers what they needed to do, right? You could look at extreme programming. We told the developers what they needed to do, but there was nothing even acknowledging that the product owner had. It was like, oh, that all happens behind the scenes. That's their day job. That's the other thing.
Did they suggest that the product owner probably needs to understand what the strategy for the organization is and how to align with it and make sure that they were pulling in work that would
I think there was a bullet point to that effect, and therefore,
A
it was
bullet
covered. you
Yeah.
know. But there was like then you took product owner training, and that went deeper into some of the mechanics of building backlogs,
Yeah.
but it still didn't talk about product management. It didn't talk about the profitability. It's
Yeah.
still, I mean, I think we did talk about ROI as a concept.
But no sort of specific instruction on how to close that feedback loop and get it to drive what the teams are doing
Yeah.
every sprint. Yeah.
So
Seems like a gap.
I still think that continues to be a struggle in organizations. Is I know I run into it a lot.
I think we're just at a point now where we can't afford we can't tolerate that gap anymore. Right? Why would I do this stuff at the team level or the team of teams level if I can't demonstrate how it improves my strategy or pays off? I think it's a totally valid question. If you have budget and authority to change how teams work, like where's the R in the ROI?
Yeah. Well, part of it is what you feed into the engine,
Totally.
right? We can build a perfectly tuned engine. We can
But where are
get,
you going to go with it?
yes, but what are you going to drive to?
Yeah. Why did you
right?
build this? Totally.
Yeah. And if you've put the race car on a track full of potholes, it's not going to go as fast as it could. It doesn't matter that you've got a highly tuned vehicle. It can't make it down the road without hitting potholes and bumps and bruises and
100%.
So early on in, I guess, the Agile journey, in the early 2000s, you know, I think there was, I'll call it neglect, and maybe it was intentional, I don't know. But there was an opportunity to incorporate product development from a product management, product development perspective, had organizations that were promoting Agile allied with an organization like PDMA, Product Development Management Association. Been around for a long time. They're your product managers.
mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't you embrace them and incorporate that? Because that provides a more full and more robust solution versus, well, we're just going to focus on the development team. Well, that's the problem. Yeah, to your point, Mike, if the product owner, whatever that is, is getting short shrift in a let's say in a Scrum situation, yeah, of course you're just going to perpetuate that siloism because you're still just focused on the development team when it has to be a continuum. And had they embraced and reached out to, PDMA or other product development organizations, we may be looking at a different state that we're in right now. I think
Maybe it was just difficult enough to get the teams to deliver well and predictably, and like fixing the delivery and the product management steering of the team was too much to do at the same time.
See, and so take it the other way. Say you built the perfect superhighway or the perfect maglev rail system or whatever, the perfect business focus, but you stick a Model T rickety thing backfiring all the time and it can barely move with 3 flat tires. You had to do both. And I think that might be where there was this big push for business agility. Like, I think that's where business agility was trying to close the loop and say, oh shit, we forgot someone.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we should maybe we need to talk to the product people board too. Like, they need to think more about what they're bringing into the system. They need to think more about how they define this stuff. They need to think about all the feedback, the payback. Like, what's the payoff on this?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there was a recognition of that, but I think it was you were dealing with a very strong-willed audience at that point.
Yeah, what we've built is necessary but not sufficient, right? It's good.
Yeah.
You need team outputs, but until you get to outcomes, you don't have anything that's worth having.
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to do something really uncharacteristic at this point and point out that we are at the end of our time box.
Thank you so much. We're developing a cross-functional team. That's exactly correct. It feels like an agile thing.
I think it's been an agile thing.
I've been Matt Beam.
I've been Mike Markey.
And I'm still Jeff Singleton.
And we will see you next week.
Same bad time.
Same bad station.
What would you say? Streaming live on YouTube, 10 a.m. Central.
Like and subscribe.
Incremental improvement. That's all we need. Thank you. I'm pressing stop.